So how many of you are developers? Why are the rest of you here? No, good, serious question, because this might be beneficial to you or it might not, and I'll change the talk because only a minority of you are developers. Somebody want to say what they do that's not development? Yes?
Me too. I'm business development manager, so I can have to see what is your vision about gaming industry.
Oh, we need to give you a mic. Okay, so this is my friend Muhammad, who I met last night. Salam. Anybody else?
I'm actually an artist, but I'm a developer. Starting.
Okay, so marketing. So some different areas. This doesn't just apply. Strategy doesn't just apply to developers. Strategy is important in business. Strategy is also important in life. We'll come to why it's important. Usually in business, this is an incredibly difficult subject for people to understand, and nobody actually asks the stupid question, which is, what is strategy? And because they don't understand strategy, or they think they understand it, there's this shared misunderstanding, everybody goes along. And because of that, companies become misshapen. So we are going to go through very, very simply, I'm not going to do the introduction to my life, thanks to you, my friend, embarrassing the hell out of me. I was going to do a very brief introduction. It was not going to be as flattering as yours, but I will go through some definitions and some strategies. So that's my timeline. So 1965 is, God knows, prehistoric, but 1982 is the age of Jahiliyyah, is when I started in the industry. I guess I made my biggest impact from 2011 to 2015 at PlayStation, where I created and led a team called Strategic Content. So strategy was in the title. And I must confess, in 2011, I didn't have a clue what strategy was either. I had the same misunderstanding about strategy that everybody does this to. Okay? He did this quite a lot, actually. People didn't notice. Does anyone know that Barack Obama is a smoker, by the way? He hid his habit very well. But yeah, he's a smoker and a yawner. So what I don't have here are my notes. That's fine. We'll go without notes. Definitions are really important. Here's an example. Somebody read out the top word. Row? Row? Yes, he understands. Somebody read out the second word. Object?
I object.
I object. You know this game, you're not allowed. Someone read out the third word. Yes, well done, he's cracked the code. A fourth word. Project? Project. Now, what's the point of this? The point is, if we don't know the context of these words, then we can have a completely different take, a completely different understanding of what's being discussed. And so if you don't think that strategy is important, and yet you can't agree on the simplest communication and what it means, that is going to impact your life. It's going to impact your communications. It is certainly going to affect your relationships with other people you work with. Those misunderstandings, in the long term, will create failure. I'm going to see if I can... No, that's not going to work, is it? So, here are some definitions. These are words that we use in Western business a lot. I'm sure that these words have equivalent translations all across the world, and I will cover some of them, but the one I will focus on is strategy. Everybody talks about what is the culture of a business. We talk about purpose, mission, vision, objectives, strategy, tactics. And you'll find that people often mistake strategy for tactics. Culture. I used to use the word culture with other people who probably had a completely different understanding. This was probably the most influential person for me at PlayStation. Anyone knows who this is? You're not allowed. Who's this? Jim Ryan, the president of PlayStation. At the time, he was not the president, so he's risen up the ranks. But in a cab ride from Hyderabad airport to our hotel that we shared, he told me what culture was. I was beginning to talk about culture, opening my mouth in front of somebody who really knows their stuff. I try not to make that mistake. Sadly, I'm making that mistake here today. There's probably several people in here who know this stuff better than I. But he said, no, culture is much simpler than that. The nonsense that I said to him about culture, I'm not going to repeat. He said, culture is the personality and the actions of a leader. And you will see that reflected all the way throughout the organization. So PlayStation, in its history, had chaotic leaders. And guess what? The organization was chaotic. People modeled the leader. Whether the leader thinks they are leading or not, people model the leader. So it's very important to understand culture. If you want to know the culture of any company, look at its leader. You want to know the culture of the USA at the moment, you only need to look at Donald Trump. No matter how much people protest, the fact is that Donald Trump is setting the frame. I'm not making a political point here. I'm making a point about culture. The culture of the discourse has been coarsened because that is how Donald Trump has framed it as the leader of the United States of America. So culture, very, very simple. Purpose. Purpose is what drives you. Purpose is what gets you up in the morning, why you are doing what you are doing. Without this, there is absolutely no point. In fact, it's very hard to wake up in the morning without purpose. Many people wake up in the morning thinking, okay, I've got to get up early because I've got to go to work. Why have you got to go to work? Because I've got to make money. Why have you got to make money? Well, because I have to pay the rent. And that's a pretty powerful purpose. It's not necessarily a positive purpose unless you enjoy your work. Nevertheless, it is a purpose. And in any business, you have to be very careful about how you define the purpose. In your life, it's very important to define your purpose. I will give you a very quick personal story. My purpose, back in PlayStation times, was to make PlayStation the natural home of independent developers. When I first started saying that publicly, people thought I was absolutely mad. 2 years later, it was a fact. Now, that sounds great, right? Well, I mean, I could have been crazy. It did sound crazy at the time. I had to convince myself I was not crazy in the beginning. But that changed the day I collapsed on the floor of our bathroom and saw my infant son looking at me, and there I was actually making the Shahada because I thought I was going to die. Now, I've suffered many episodes in my life. I've come close to death many times, but that was a time when I thought, I have absolutely no idea what this is. I could be dying. I have no idea why I've collapsed. I'd been pushing myself very, very hard. So, overnight, my purpose changed. It didn't change in the first half hour, by the way, because my first response after the paramedics arrived and checked my pulse and said they couldn't find a pulse, my first response, my wife tells me, was to ask her to phone my boss to say I would be half an hour late today. Yeah? That's what purpose can do to you. It can drive you beyond all reasonable limits. A day later, I had to take the day off, otherwise my wife would not have been very happy. And the fact that the paramedics couldn't initially find a pulse also had something to do with that. My purpose changed entirely. But what happened is that my life had to catch up with my new purpose. My new purpose was much more family-oriented. My purpose became, I have to be able to see my son grow up. He needs a father. Now, suddenly, if my work got in the way of that, work had to come second. So you have to have a purpose, and the important thing is you have to know what that purpose is. It's in life, if it's in business, anything. If you have not written down your purpose, you are not living your life. As my new friend Martin told me this morning over coffee, your life is living you. Mission. Your mission is the things that you do in order to arrive at your objective. Your mission is how you turn your purpose into reality. So you write down the things that you are going to do. So for example, my mission, one of my personal mission statements became spend more time with my son. And that meant I had to come home earlier. So I started coming home earlier. I still worked, but I worked more from home in the evenings. But that became part of my mission. Oh, that's interesting. We just knocked the HDMI out. Okay. So your vision is an aspiration. It is a thing that you create a picture of to motivate yourself, to motivate your team, to motivate your co-workers, to motivate your family. It is a picture you paint in your mind of the promised land, which of course we're not very far from, literally. But metaphorically speaking, you need your own promised land, a vision of that in your head. And my vision at PlayStation was, and this was crazy at the time, you have to understand at the time, Vita was it seemed like a complete failure. So we're talking about 2011, 2012. The vision I had was Vita is a preferred destination for independent developers. This is back end of 2011, right at the beginning of 2012. By 2013, this was a fact. Now, it was so ridiculous, so powerful. The important thing is, if you don't have the drive, the purpose, a clear mission on how to reach that vision, nobody's going to believe you. You can't just sit there saying, yeah, don't worry, it's going to happen. This is not like The Secret, you know, where you make an affirmation and things just fall into your lap. Anyone seen the film The Secret? Yeah? Yeah, it's not about that. A vision is, with absolute clarity, a reality that can... Have we lost it again? A reality that can take shape. Now here's the interesting thing about a vision, especially when it relates to business. It should be slightly, depending on how much effort you're willing to put in, slightly or massively outside your personal comfort zone. Otherwise, it does not generate enough pull for the people you're trying to attract. So you can imagine, everybody is laughing at the Vita. That device has failed. Forget it. We're going to iOS, or we're going to go to this or that or whatever. But some people are going, hold on a minute, this guy is absolutely batshit crazy. But then things start to happen. And at first, people are going to laugh at you. So this is an example of a vision that was way outside my comfort zone. You don't have to do that. But you should start at some point beyond your comfort zone. Because otherwise you're just doing what everybody else has already done. And it's not a vision, it's just a task. It's just, oh yeah, I have a presentation to do by 2 weeks' time to convince somebody of an internal plan. Something like that is not a vision. Something like that is just a project or a task. It has to frighten you a little bit, otherwise it's not a vision. A vision has to be something slightly beyond what you've already achieved, otherwise it's not a vision. Now here's the key thing. It has to be attractive. And when I say attractive, I mean that literally. As a leader, your job is to put that vision very, very clearly in the minds of the people who are working with you. Even if there's just two of you, you should be able to communicate that vision and put it in people's minds so that it inspires them to act. If you have a well-articulated mission, then they will know what actions they need to take.
Can we just go back to take a lecture for
No. Did you want the notes for it? I can share the notes after the talk. Yeah? I can't see the notes myself, but that's fine. I know what they are. Okay, so the bit that I think is very important. If you look at the Wikipedia definition of strategy, it's not what I've got here. I think the difference between strategy and tactics is much more subtle than people appreciate, but also much more important. Objective is easy. Objective is a goal. What is the thing, and everybody here knows about goal setting and what you need to do to achieve a goal. Goal needs to be very clear, measurable, blah-de-blah. You know all of this. The strategy is the key idea or key ideas that you are going to use to reach your objective. The tactics are the actual measures that you will take that conform to the strategy. I'll give you some examples. But first, here's the mistake you can make if you keep changing your strategy. Strategy has to be used over a long period of time. Otherwise, you will never get to your goal. So this, as you can see, is the stages of growth of a plant. And what most people do is what Manchester United, you all know Manchester United? It's what Manchester United have been doing with their managers since Sir Alex Ferguson left. They give them this long, and then they sack them, right? So every manager that has come in since Sir Alex Ferguson has had their own ideas. But it takes time, right? So imagine if I'd been told, okay, go ahead, work on your strategy. We worked on our strategy on Vita. 3 months later, we had no results. 3 months later, we were here. Okay, that's not working, we'll cancel the project. This is what Manchester United have been doing. They don't give the people enough time for the strategy to start to yield some results. It takes time. And the reason for this is simple. A series of actions based on a strategy, a series of actions or tactics that are congruent with the strategy have a compounding return effect. You do not see the results soon. The results accrue over time. You are going to need patience in this period. You're going to have doubters in this period. But you must stay true to the strategy. Otherwise, you will spend your life in this cycle. And if I give you anything today, if you take away anything from this today, it is to convince you of the importance of believing, of having iman, to go beyond this point. If you do not, you'll spend your life in that, oh, this isn't working, I'll change. This isn't working, I'll change. A really good example of this is physical exercise. I know. Well, what am I saying about? Actually, this is way better than it was a year ago. So, physical exercise. If you stopped after the first session, as you'd have every right to, what would happen? I'll tell you what would happen. A friend of mine, recently, last week, he had a heart attack. He's younger than me. He had a massive heart attack. He's in hospital on life support and critical condition. And I pray, inshallah, he's still around when I go back. Please make dua for him. That can happen at a young age if you don't take care of your physical health. Now, what is the strategy? Okay, because I've talked about strategy, I've talked about tactics. Strategy is the key idea. Strategy would be health. Health is my strategy. Now, what is my tactic? My tactic is going to the gym. Okay, that's a good idea. But how many times a week? This is when the implementation of tactics becomes really serious. I'll go 3 times a week. Bad idea. Nobody goes to the gym 3 days a week and keeps it up. Why? Because you don't have time to develop a habit, and also you start to think, I've been once, maybe I'll skip Tuesday, maybe I'll skip Wednesday. Suddenly we're at Saturday and you've only been once because you couldn't make up your mind. So going to the gym is a bad tactic. Better to say, I will develop a habit to exercise for 30 minutes every single day. Sounds insane, but it's possible. Start the day with a 30-minute walk. Done. Within 1 month, you're already this far down on your mission of developing health. Exercise doesn't have to be going to the gym. Going and having a walk for half an hour has incredible health benefits for the heart. So the strategy of health needs to have really, really concrete tactics. So don't sack your strategies before they've had time to bear fruit. Don't treat your life like Manchester United treat their managers. Let's talk about some real-world examples of strategies. These are examples of strategies. They will appear shortly. Safety is a strategy. Large organizations are inherently safe. They do not take risks. Hollywood blockbusters are safe. Safety is a strategy of the Hollywood blockbuster machine. Sounds crazy, but look, it's the same for AAA games. If you spend 200 million making a movie or a video game, US dollars, doesn't matter. 200 million of any currency is a lot of money. You spend 200 million making a video game and 200 million marketing it. You need a return. So you have to go with the tried and tested. So a good strategy for a blockbuster movie machine or a blockbuster AAA video game machine is safety. But you cannot have that approach if you're an independent developer. That is not a good strategy for an independent developer. Why? Because you have the advantage of being able to make mistakes, learn from them quickly, reacting, coming up with something interesting. So being adventurous is a good strategy for an independent developer. Fair versus ruthless. I'm not saying fair is the opposite of ruthless, but you know, you could say that sometimes in order to be ruthless, you have to be slightly unfair because it's about self-interest. Banks are generally ruthless. Why? Because they're playing with say they're ruthless. They're now ruthless. Before 2008, they were reckless. Yeah, before the crash, they were reckless. And that wasn't actually a strategy. It was a tactic. It was an accumulation of tactics that didn't conform to the banker's strategy. And it caused them immense problems. Flexible and controlling are two other very good contrasting strategies. So, for example, the PlayStation before strategic content was very controlling. It wanted to control access to PlayStation as a distribution platform. But after strategic content, it was a lot more flexible, a lot more open as opposed to a lot more closed. These are all strategies. How they relate to your objective is something else entirely. What was the strategy of Apple in Steve Jobs' time? Anyone want to take a stab at this? No. They did not innovate. Yes. Control is very important. User experience is very important. So user experience was the strategy. It's a key tenet for this guy. And the reason it was a key tenet of his strategy, the user experience, is because he believed that customers didn't always know what they wanted, but once they got it, they would love it, if the user experience was perfect. And so for him, simplicity was another strategy. So I would argue that the three strands of Apple's strategy were control, user experience, not UX in a modern term, which is widely abused, but user experience and simplicity. Given the choice, he would always go for simplicity. Control was absolutely vital. He wanted control of everything from the top to the bottom, from how much access reporters had to how the shops were created, because of course there wasn't always an Apple store. But when he created the store, he got some of the best people in the world involved. And their first design, just before it was about to launch, was scrapped. And it wasn't scrapped because of Steve Jobs, it was scrapped because of the partner he took on board saying, I think this doesn't conform with XYZ, which was strategic. And Steve Jobs gave him such a bollocking. Bollocking is a very British word. Yeah, it means it means shouting at abusively, like a boss does to some people sometimes. So he gave this guy such a bollocking. But then when he got to the meeting about the next phase, he said, he's right, we got to do this again. It was that important that they're prepared to make that kind of mistake. I'll give you another example, not related to Apple, of how strategy can inform your decisions even at great cost. I was once asked about an issue with Little Big Planet while I was at PlayStation. And it was an issue to do with an African singer who used a common expression in Arabic. I won't repeat it because it's confidential. Not the expression, but its connotation to this event. And it's a commonly used expression in Arabic that happens to be in the Quran as well. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut, I think, was the line used. If anyone's familiar with this expression. But every soul shall taste of death. Yeah? Am I right that it's a reasonably common Arabic expression as well as being in the Quran? People use this from time to time? So, the question was this, because it was used in music, one group got in touch with PlayStation, very small but active group, and said, we are going to destroy you. And they didn't mean literally, we're going to destroy you in the media if this game comes out with this. I happen to be a convenient Muslim, and I was consulted. And I said, personally, as a practicing Muslim, I don't find this offensive because he is not being demeaning, because the expression is used in Arabic language. It is not exclusive to the Quran. I don't think that the context makes it offensive. Therefore, I think that the 2 million discs you have just printed should go out. David Reeves, great man that he was, still is, I mean, he was at PlayStation, leant back in his chair thoughtfully, just like this pose here, actually. And he said, no, we're going to destroy the discs. I was amazed. But why? I don't think you need to do this. He said, it doesn't matter if we're right or wrong. We cannot take a risk like this with the reputation of PlayStation. He ordered the destruction of 2 million discs. It was not whether it was right or wrong. But for David Reeves, number one example of strategy in action, reputation. Reputation is a strategy, a reputation that he would spend millions and millions of euro in a late launch to protect. Sir Alex Ferguson, controlling, development. He developed talent. These are key strategies. An example, how many of you have heard of Roy Keane? Hands up if you've heard. A few people. Roy Keane was the most successful captain and the most influential midfield player in the Premier League, and certainly the most successful captain in Manchester United's history. But he was ruthlessly sacked. He was let go, told his services were not needed, because on one show, on a Manchester United show, he seemed to be slightly negative about the Manchester United performance. And for Sir Alex Ferguson, togetherness, inclusiveness, control, these are all very important strategies. You never, ever betrayed the team in public. And because of that, he was ruthless with Roy Keane and let him go. Many people say that cost Manchester United the title that season. And it did. But then they won the title 3 years in a row because he stuck to his strategy. So another important point about strategy is you will suffer setbacks. But in the long run, Sir Alex Ferguson is the most successful manager in the history of the British game. My favorite. Jurgen Klopp is my team's manager. He has slightly different strategy. He has a strategy of radical honesty. I mean radical honesty. He will say exactly what's on his mind, but it's informed. Another one of his strategies is commitment. Any player that shows less than 100% commitment will not make it into the team, no matter how good they are. Our best defender at some point, I say our best defender, I'm a Liverpool fan, was Mohamed Sakho. He was let go because he was not committed, even though he was the best defender. So this wasn't about control, this was about commitment. Because Sakho was not prepared to be committed to the cause, he was let go. So commitment, radical honesty. You're wondering why I haven't said passion. It's not passion. Actually, passion is not a strategy. Passion is a tactic. And it is employed judiciously at certain phases in a game. So, for example, in one half of a game, they will employ the tactic. So you need to remember this for your own life. You don't use the same approach just because your strategy is singular. It doesn't mean you use the same approach for your strategy all the time. Right? So, for example, if your strategy in life, one strategy is health, and one day you can't walk for whatever reason, maybe it's way too hot, you haven't got access to the car, or you're woken up late, whatever, way past Fajr time, and off you go, and you think, no, it's way too hot, can't do this, For whatever reason, you decide not to take a walk. It doesn't have to be your only tactic to achieve health. Maybe you have a stationary bike at home. Maybe you can do some squats or push-ups or whatever. So people mistake tactics with strategy, end up not achieving their goals. Because you think that doing the same tactics is what gives you the results. It is not. The people who get ultimate success are the ones who are willing to change tactics to support exactly the same strategy. So, for example, Steve Jobs was very famous for this. We've talked about the strategies, user experience, control, simplicity. But you saw that the iPhone became more and more complex because people's ability to understand what a phone could do evolved over time. 5 minutes. We're nearly done. So change your tactics. We've talked so much about some of the things that we did at Strategic Content that I'm not going to cover this in too much detail, apart from to say that openness was a strategy. Communication was a strategy. But the tactics that we used changed over time. Here's the other thing. your objectives might change. So for example, I'll give you a personal objective. My personal objective is to get down to 85 kilos in 4 weeks' time. I started this objective about 8 weeks ago. I'm on track. I'm getting there, inshallah. Now, what is a tactic for that? The tactic is to go to the gym. But some days, some weeks, I'm not able to do that, so I've had to change my tactics. But then beyond that, remember this tactic is in support of my strategy of health. After this period, my objective will change again. So be careful how you set your objectives so that you don't demotivate yourself. 85 kgs is achievable. 75 kgs is not. Yeah? Some people have done it. You might have heard of a guy called David Goggins. He can do it. I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to starve and go outside in 40, 50 Celsius heat and run with 5 layers of clothing for 6 hours a day with a broken leg. He's done that. I'm not prepared to do that to lose 10 kilos. So your tactics have to support your objectives, which have to be in line with your strategy. So at Ultimatum, flexibility is a key strategy. And when I say flexibility, I'm talking about with respect to my team. They're allowed to work whenever they like, wherever they like. Sounds crazy, right? But it works because I only work with people who are experienced, disciplined, professional, and good communicators. And one key criteria is that they must have suffered a failure and recovered from it, a big failure and recovered from it. Because otherwise, when you face an issue, you'd be working with somebody who doesn't know how to handle failure. And that could be catastrophic. Because of this, they're able to meet all of the objectives. We've worked with 4 partners, working with a 5th now. Final criteria, final strategy is inclusiveness. And inclusiveness for us means we'll work with anybody on any game so long as it meets with our strategies. And our strategies are very simple. So long as we get to stay flexible and enjoy that flexibility, everything's going to turn out fine. And I think we're done.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, I think just a minute or two, if you don't have any questions, I think the whole point of this for me is separating ourselves, giving ourselves time to step back and think about what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. Does anyone have any questions for Shahid? A question at the front here. We'll get a microphone to you.
It's working. I don't think it's working. Anyways, Shahid, hearing everything you said, it seems to me that I have my previous understanding has very key semantic differences. So everything you mentioned as strategy, for me, I always believed, I always thought of it as culture, values. So is that important? Or should I start thinking about them as a strategy? Or what's the difference? Because there's a lot of discussion about...
Yeah, that's a great question. So he's asking about, he's saying sometimes strategy, tactics, values get confused. I hope I've clarified the difference between strategy and tactics.
Yes,
yeah? Strategy is like your big idea. Tactics is the steps you actually take. Values are what inform your strategy. So for example, my value is my family, right? My strategy for enjoying the most amount of time with my family is health. You wouldn't know that because I smoke when I travel, but I never smoke at home. And because of that, I can stay a non-smoker longer than I am a smoker. So you might be able to find lots of these little anomalies, but they all follow, right? So you don't want to live a long life and hate your life, right? You've got to have a little fun from time to time. So fun is also a value. I don't want a miserable, long life. So this is really important. Your personal values have to inform your strategy. Otherwise, you won't believe in the strategy. Who wants to work for a company that's controlling and who prefers freedom? If you want to work for a company that has a strategy of freedom, you don't work at Apple, right? So this will inform your life decisions. You need to understand the strategy, even if the company doesn't make the strategy clear to you. Nobody told me explicitly the strategy of Apple, but you can look at what they've been doing. You can read about Steve Jobs and understand what he's done to see that that is exactly their strategy. But your personal values should drive your personal strategy, and if your personal values conflict with the strategy of the company or the partners you want to work with, you have a decision to make. Does that answer the question?
In a way, yes. My issue is, when it comes to culture versus strategy, I'm still not able to, remove those examples that you mentioned as strategy.
Culture is a personality and actions of the leader. The leader does not always act in accordance with the objectives in the strategy. The leader does not always understand the difference between strategy and tactics. The difference between a good leader and a great leader is a great leader understands the difference. Yeah?
I think it's particularly noticeable if you've ever worked in a telecom company, as I have on several occasions. There are lots of efforts.
Poor guy.
Lots of attempts to have culture meetings and culture events and culture processes, but if it's not actually followed through by management, which it almost never is, the actual culture always reverts to the mean, which is, as exactly you say, the actions and behaviour of the leaders. So, that's why I think authenticity, is kind of part of this. The authenticity of it is such a critical part. Particularly, I like your point about vision, and it has to be a bit scary. If it's not scary, you haven't got that momentum, you haven't got that direction you're going in. So, one quick question, if anyone wants to go there. We'll try and get the microphone to the recording.
No, it's fine.
It's working.
Go for it.
What do you think of convenience as a strategy if it maintains the quality?
Yeah, convenience could be a strategy.
If you do your best to be convenient and while not
Here's the important thing. So, your objectives are likely to change throughout life and throughout business. But your strategies should change less often than your business, because it's your values that connect to the strategies, right? Objectives change all the time. We all have different goals. The things I wanted when I was 7, I didn't want when I was 14. Definitely. They were different things. So your goals will change throughout your life.
What about business?
Same. Every year, a business sets, especially a large organization like PlayStation, even my small organization, we have yearly goals. What do we want to do this year? What do we want to do next year? We don't necessarily make 5-year plans. That's crazy these days. But you certainly want to look ahead at the year ahead and say, these are our objectives. This is what we would like to achieve. We're going to continue with our strategy. We've had the same strategy in my company for 4 years. And we used much of the same strategy as strategic content where I was for 4 years. So 8 years, I followed very similar working strategies. Reputation is a strategy for me as well. I learned that from David Reeves very early. You don't change your strategies very often, but you change your objectives. You don't change your values, but you change your tactics.
And on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.